When my brother was young, he was obsessed with creepy, crawly creatures. Now, we grew up in deepest, darkest Africa, and everybody knows that deepest, darkest Africa is chock full of creepy, crawly creatures. Each time my brother left the house, he would inevitably return with some sort of treasure. A scorpion in a jar, a chameleon in his pocket, a spider on a leash. The funny thing was, not once was he stung, not once was he bitten, and not once did he test positive for rabies. But for all the creatures he collected, there was one thing my brother desired above everything else, and that was a pet snake. However, if there was one thing that could turn my mother's insides completely out, it was a snake. Well, one evening when my brother returned home from prospecting pests, he didn't perform his usual show and tell. Instead, he hurried to his bedroom, hiding something under his shirt, and slammed the door shut. My mother marched after him, flung open the door, and let out an almighty scream. I ran in to find her throttling one of the biggest snakes I had ever seen. My brother scolded her and told her the snake was more afraid of her than she was of it. The snake then opened its mouth. "It's trying to eat me," my mother cried. "It can't eat you," my brother said. "You're far too big." My mother then gave him a look that most mothers are familiar with, the look that says, "You are definitely your father's child." "I'm not trying to call you fat," my brother said. "It's just that the snake can't swallow anything much bigger than a rat or rabbit, maybe a mid-sized poodle." But as far as my mother was concerned, the snake didn't have a leg to stand on. "You are going to lock that snake in your closet tonight, and then tomorrow morning it's," my mother ordered. "I'm not going to kill my snake," my brother said. "But fine, tomorrow I will take it to a less hostile environment." But the next day, the snake was gone. My brother couldn't find it. However, he did come across the hole he had once cut in the wall to harbor a fugitive mouse. He confessed the situation to our mother. Well, that did it. For the next few days, my mother was like a woman possessed. She spent every waking moment with her ear pressed against the wall, creeping around every room in the house, clutching a carving knife. She started to get that crazed glint in her eye. Well, after a week of watching her stab each room in the house, after a week of eating nothing but dried Cheerios, my desperate father devised a plan. He woke me early in the morning, and together we drove to every pet shop in town. It was at an off-the-grid reptile dealership that he finally found what he was looking for, a snake that looked exactly like the one my brother had lost. He asked the owner if he could borrow it. The owner looked at him as if he were mad and said, "One does not simply borrow a violet-tipped boa constrictor. It is one of the rarest snakes in Africa." "Look," my father said, "the situation is serious. I won't go into details, but this snake could save my marriage." The owner thought for a while and said, "I'll rent it to you for $300, and on the condition that you return it alive." Well, knowing that he couldn't stomach another cereal dinner, my father agreed to the terms, grabbed the snake, chucked it into the car, and off we went. On our way back, my father instructed me to tickle the snake. Now, he was so focused on his plan, I didn't dare to question him. So I started tickling the snake, and it began to laugh. I don't see why that's so unusual. Have you ever tried to tickle a snake? Anyway, it began to laugh, and at that moment, my father shoved a pill down its throat. "What was that?" I asked. "Ambien," he said with a chuckle. Well, when we got back home, my father took the snake, which was now in a coma, tied it around his neck, grabbed a spool of fishing line and a ladder, propped the ladder against a tree in our yard, and climbed up. He then unraveled the snake and stretched it out along a branch. Well, you should have seen it. The poor snake kept sliding off, so my father had to hold it with his cheek as he wound the fishing line around and around its body, from the top of its head to the tip of its tail. He then dropped the spool down to me and instructed me to hold the line tight, but to let go when I heard the signal. "What's the signal?" I asked. "You'll know," he said, and he jumped off the ladder, headed into the house, and sat by a window, waiting for my mother to perform the next sweep of that room. When she walked in, my father nonchalantly glanced outside. He suddenly leapt up and shouted, "The snake! It's in the tree!" He then ran to his room, grabbed his .22, which was conveniently preloaded, sprinted outside, took aim, and fired. Well, I realized this was the signal, and I let go of the spool. The line went slack around the snake's body, and it fell out of the tree. My father picked it up and told my mother that we were off to dispose of the body, and we zoomed back to the reptile dealership. When we handed the limp snake back to the owner, he took one look at it and said, "You've killed it!" "It's alive," my father reassured him. "It's just rather sedated." "Well, that's lucky for you," the owner said, "because this snake is my golden goose. I make 30 grand every time it sheds its skin. Cosmetics companies use the scales in high-end eyeshadows." Well, as you can imagine, the whole way home, my father kept emphasizing how important it was that we find the snake my brother had lost. Well, by the time we returned, my mother had done a complete 180. She was grilling burgers on the barbecue and singing an Adele song. You perked up," my father said, smiling. My mother agreed she was feeling much better. And then she asked my father, "Were you aware you left your gun lying out?" My father started to apologize. No, it's all right," my mom said. "It was quite fortunate, really, because when I went to put it away, the snake slithered right out of your boot. The snake you shot must have been a different one." My father's jaw hit the floor. My mom then turned to me and said with a grin, "Don't you dare tell your brother that these burgers aren't beef."